Hello my dear friends, welcome. Thank you for joining me here. I'm Ancestor and today I'm going to talk about Baba Yaga, which is an absolutely fascinating character of Slavic folklore, and given that we have just left October, I would like to extend the mood of the season and talk a little bit about this figure now in November, because this is a pretty boring month in between my favorite months of the year. There isn't much going on in November, and it always feels like a very dull, tedious limbo. And well, my apologies to those who have their birthdays on this month, but I mean, it's on you actually. You had 11 other options and yet you chose to be born in November. Well then, this video today won't be the result of a thorough work of research, not just yet anyway. I may do a future academic work on video format concerning Baba Yaga, but for now I would just like to share a few thoughts on this figure, because I believe there's been quite a lot of misunderstandings involving the folklore where Baba Yaga appears, and quite a bit of misconceptions, especially also through the lens of New Age religions such as Wicca, mostly from Wicca, which has the tendency to simplify things and put them into specific shelves, which destroys the rich content behind several belief systems. So I'm going to have here a general discussion, let's say, and point out a few key aspects to this figure and what she might represent and what she does not represent. And given the information here expressed today, I hope to read your comments on the matter as well, because, well, I mean, expressing your views on Baba Yaga and address this issue in a way that might put on the table some questions to be answered in a future academic work on Baba Yaga in this channel. Now, just before we start, I just want to remind you very briefly that I have a Patreon, and if you want to help this channel keep going by allowing me to carry on with the work I have done here so far, consider becoming a patron. You have my deepest gratitude, and thank you, and a very special thanks, of course, to all those who have become my patrons. Thank you for your support. So that's it. Now, here we go straight to it. So, one of the first things that has caught my attention in relation to the modern interest of the pagan community towards Baba Yaga, and something I do not agree with and bothers me to the point of wanting to talk about this in a video, as you can see, well, it is this tendency to attribute the state of the triple goddess aspect to Baba Yaga or any other feminine figure people are too lazy to dig through. I mean, no doubt that it is hard to form a coherent explanation of the full purpose and meaning of Baba Yaga, such is the way when dealing with folklore. However, to reduce her to the aspect of the crone, just the crone from the neo-pagan standing view of the Virgin, the Mother and the Crone archetype, it's just not right. Certainly, putting aside the more pejorative meanings of the term Baba, she is indeed characterized as an old woman, far more connected to a sort of grandmother as an elderly familiar figure, but that doesn't mean she automatically fits into the neo-pagan perspective of the crone, because that would be implying that Baba Yaga in the stories would have younger versions of herself, and that's just not the case. On the contrary, actually, it is clear that Baba Yaga has always been old. She's never been anything else, and that's the point. She's no ordinary woman. Her nature is just like that. She has always been old. Now, I do get why there's this tendency to see her as a crone as well when people assume Baba Yaga to be a goddess somehow. So perhaps some other entities, some divine entities could be associated to her, and in this way she could be the crone version, but she isn't a goddess. There are no traces of any sort of religious reference towards Baba Yaga, as if she was a divine entity. This doesn't mean, however, obviously, that people nowadays cannot venerate her as they would venerate a deity. But if we start to dig through the layers of Baba Yaga's folklore and come closer to what she might have represented, perhaps in this way people can conduct their pagan religious expressions towards her in a different way, in a very different way. The fact that Baba Yaga manifests herself as an old person and always her existence has been as an elderly woman, clearly living on either a realm that serves as a sort of limbo, a threshold between the realm of the living and that of the other side, or she is already indeed on the realm of the dead. She is dead. This means that she is dead. Mind you that I don't believe she is a supernatural manifestation, but rather where she inhabits, that's her realm. Not in the sense of being a goddess of a particular realm or a goddess of death, but she has always been an old person. And we might be facing one of the oldest myths we encounter in several cultures throughout the world. She's the first dead human person. She's the first human that ever died. This could have two possible scenarios, of course, at the very least. So far, under the research I've made, two possible scenarios under the animistic implications of this folklore. Baba Yaga is either the first ancestor or she is the first dead one, the first dead human person. The two are not the same, as was here explained before on the video I've made about animism and the ancestors, or the ancestors in animism, not every dead person becomes an ancestor. Just because people die under the animistic understanding, in very broad terms, of course, one does not automatically become an ancestor. Looking at past societies and present ones that still hold festivities for the departed, it is clear that there's a strong separation between those who have died and those who have become ancestors. There's festival ceremonies and celebrations and rituals and so on and so forth held towards the ancestors, and then there are those held towards the dead. An ancestor is a person who is worthy of being remembered and honored, and it is evoked, and in particular times of the year, very much invoked in order to continue to help the living and help those who still hold ceremonies towards the ancestors. The ancestor is a person of importance towards whom the living maintain contact with in order to keep its memory alive, as the ancestor can be of use, can come to still aid the living. This is manifested in thousands of different ways, including ancestors returning in the form of, let's say as an example, returning in the form of animals and giving themselves to be hunted in order to keep feeding the community of the living. Just as an example, also here spoken before on another video. The point is, when a person dies, only becomes an ancestor through a post-mortem process of transformation through the rituals and ceremonies held by the living towards that person. An ancestor is honored, venerated, worshipped, praised. If Baba Yaga is an ancestor, the modern worshipping towards her can be quite different and channeled to different needs, not as a goddess, but as an ancestor. This means that if she represents the first ancestor, she represents the first human of importance who went through the process of transformation after death, because she was important to the community of the living who have turned her into an ancestor. As we can all imagine, the first ancestor is the first person that holds important knowledge about the afterlife and about several other aspects of the supernatural, and the first to pass that sort of knowledge unto the living, making Baba Yaga a very important figure as the first who has stepped into the other side, the other world, let's say, and reached this category, this existence of being an ancestor, so the first otherworldly person to aid the community of the living. This makes Baba Yaga a benign being, or would make Baba Yaga a benign being. However, on the other hand, Baba Yaga may represent the first dead human person, and that's something else. And that doesn't necessarily mean that she has become an ancestor, because an ancestor is someone that in life was a person of great importance to the community of the living, and in death can carry on to deliver something beneficial to the community of the living human beings. Being the first dead, however, means that she literally was the first human, or to die, the first human being to have died, the first spirit to cross over and pass into the other side, which by itself makes Baba Yaga the oldest, the most knowledgeable spirit, because it resides longest in the other world, therefore the most powerful in matters of death. This doesn't mean that she is an ancestor, which means that she doesn't want to aid the community of the living, not so willingly. She is the first dead human person, therefore the most powerful and knowledgeable in matters of death and supernatural aspects of the conceptions of death and the dead. And if there's a beneficial side to her, maybe one that guides the dead, or that she can be reached in her own realm through a process of near-death experience, comatose, out-of-body experience, trance, some process to have a conscious or subconscious, unconscious contact with the other world in order to reach the wisdom of Baba Yaga. The fact that in the stories she seems to be quite hostile, or at least not straightforward in benign actions, may exactly mean this. She's not an ancestor, but she is the first dead, therefore quite powerful, but her existence is not one to aid the human community, and such is the existence and expression of so many persons we usually call spirits, because, well, death is an abrupt process of transformation, transition and transformation, and there are multiple outcomes for a spirit person. But Baba Yaga is wise nonetheless, is powerful nonetheless. Now, this brings us to the old question. If she is the first human person to have ever died, who made her? Who are her parents? If she was the first to die, shouldn't that position be held by at least one of her parents? And who are the parents of her own parents? Shouldn't they be the first ones to die before Baba Yaga herself? And on it goes. But it seems to me, of course, that's the whole point of her being old, and she has always been old. She was never a child to begin with. There's no past in which she holds the position of the virgin and the mother and all that narrow neo-pagan archetypal perspective. She has always been old. There's no parents or grandparents or anyone else. She's always existed as an old person, and she was the first to die. She did not just die of old age, she is old age, she is timeless. She is the first human being to have died and crossed over. She's the first, and the first is the oldest, the eldest. This is important to state, because when people have the tendency to see her as the Crone, there's always this aspect of healing to it somehow. Usually coming from modern age romantic views on the figure of the witch as an old woman living in the woods and providing medicine for the community. As such, some people see her as this archetype of the Crone, as a goddess that is linked to healing somehow. She's not this romantic contemporary neo-pagan stereotype of the midwife or the wise old lady provider of medicine and knowledge and magic. Baba Yaga is dead, very much dead. She is a powerful spirit who belongs to the world of the dead, the realm of the spirits. And if Baba Yaga's realm is the place in between, the threshold for spirits, it's not about healing, but about a crossover, a transformation, a transition. If she's the first dead person, she lies in the position of helping crossing over, or at the very least to guide into the next existence, provided that people can go past her. Maybe she is in the position to choose who gets to cross over. Baba Yaga is the grandmother, the eldest, the one who has more knowledge. However, Baba Yaga has always been old. Baba Yaga is dead. She's the first spirit, the spirit of the grandmother. Mind you that I do not take away her condition as a witch in the sense of a person on the threshold over the hedge as a liminal space between the civilized and the wild, between the sacred and the profane, or better still, between the tamed and the untamed. She's not a midwife, she's not a healer, she's not the wise woman witch who lives on the edge of the woods or beyond the hedge. She's the witch as the figure of the person who is capable of existing between realms, the one who holds the first knowledge on how to cross over between realms and being in contact with the other realms, with a foot in and out. She's not a goddess. She's a human person, or was a human person, the first to have died, the first to acquire the knowledge on crossing over, the first to fully become, if you will, the hedge witch, if you want to put some modern perceptions into it for a better understanding. She's an ancestral spirit. And I think this can be better determined by the rich variety of folklore around Baba Yaga. There isn't one single Baba Yaga, but they are all different and unique in some form. And this isn't just due to the fact that folklore is an oral method to preserve traditions and belief systems in living memory. There are indeed different Baba Yagas, even in the same story, because the belief systems is in an ancestral spirit existing in each community of living human beings. Baba Yaga becomes a title for the first dead, for the first ancestor or ancestral spirit that is called upon by the community of the living human persons, the grandmother of the community, calling upon their ancestral spirit, the very spirit force and memory of the community, the first that has begun to the community and the first to cross over to pave the way for their descendants, for the future ancestors. Folklore itself gives Baba Yaga different conceptions. So I think it is very lazy, indeed, to reduce her to the Crone archetype, also because of this. She remains in living memory through folklore as a figure with multiple functions in different folkloric content, because if indeed we are in the presence of an ancestral spirit, the ancestral spirit as a conception of the first memory and first actions taken by the one who started the human community, such a figure will have, obviously, different aspects for each community according to their living history and tradition. We cannot see her as an all benevolent or all malevolent spirit. There's too many different conceptions to the figure of Baba Yaga. She doesn't have to be necessarily just one thing or another. She's the ancestral spirit. So for each community will have different functions, and also according to each of the different needs of each community applied to their own moral conceptions and understandings of what can constitute right or wrong. The most malevolent aspects of Baba Yaga can very well be the teachings of the first ancestors as what constitutes taboo to each particular community. And taboo can vary quite a lot from society to society, from generation to generation, and from time to time. Such is the knowledge of the first ancestor, the grandmother of the community, the first ancestral spirit of the community, to pass on knowledge about the things that lead to a community to thrive, and to also show the things that must not be done and constitute taboo, must be avoided, which must be avoided in order to preserve the community. In fact, looking at the several folkloric accounts on Baba Yaga, the greatest percentage show that there's a lot more fear on the part of the living towards her, rather than actively seeking her out for aid. This alone already eradicates the idea that she is a benevolent witch of the forest, the healer midwife or whatever. This type of fear towards an ancestral spirit is quite common in an animistic perception, as we so often hear and read about the modes of life animistic communities have in order to avoid angering the spirits, particularly the ancestral ones. and to avoid aggravating any situation by vexing or disturbing the ancestral spirits. This can also be applied to spirits of nature, spirits of the world, spirits that inhabit parts of the world that are taboo or where the human presence must be minimized as much as possible in order to avoid disturbing ancestral spirits that might bring about something harmful to the human community of the living. After all, Baba Yaga lives in the wilderness, out there in the untamed. It falls more under the parameters of the figure of a shaman as a person who often lives on the threshold or is banished and lives out of the community, out there, and yet the spiritual capacities of that person are sought after to a certain extent, as this person is both feared and revered. However, Baba Yaga is dead, and if by any chances there are glimpses here of a conception towards shamanism, for a lack of a better term, this fear on Baba Yaga is the taboo of not stepping into sacred ground where the spirits of the dead shamans dwell and their burial sites and remains must not be disturbed. But that may be pushing it a little bit too far, of course. The likely scenario seems to be the existence of the conception on the first ancestor that we are dealing with in here, right? But speaking of this idea of a shaman and to avoid disturbing the burial site of such a powerful person, and also picking on the fact that Baba Yaga is dead, very much dead, this leads us to the conception of her house. Baba Yaga's house moves because it's on chicken legs. Now, the very first thing that comes to mind isn't even from Slavic cultures, but rather from finno-ugric cultures, particularly those of the Sami, which in ancient times up until the Scandinavian early Iron Age occupied a much larger territory, extending much further south in Scandinavia, but up north, occupying what are now the current territories of the countries of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia, particularly the Kola Peninsula as part of Russia. We are talking about circumpolar traditions in closer territorial contact with Siberia. Now, many cultures all over the world, including in my own country, have buildings, structures to store grains and cured meats and such, which are elevated from the ground, standing on 4 legs, and the entrance is inaccessible, save only by the use of some form of ladder. This is to save grains and other types of means of sustenance from predators, storing houses for food, particularly those from harvests. Now, looking at finno-ugric cultures, we see these types of storehouses with a particularly interesting detail to them, especially among the Sami, which are these houses standing on stilts which look like chicken legs. Baba Yaga's hut may come from finno-ugric and Siberian influences. But why does she live on a storage house? That's the question. Well, as an ancestral spirit, this could mean the aid of ancestral spirits to protect the production, to protect the means of sustenance that have already been harvested, gathered, or cured. But there may be a darker side to this. Baba Yaga is dead. Her hut is her burial hut, the burial storehouse on stilts. It was not uncommon to deposit the dead on these types of houses, because if we are indeed dealing with finno-ugric and Siberian influences, we are dealing with populations used to long environments of cold season in which the soils are frozen solid, and you cannot bury the dead because you can't dig a hole, or rather you can dig a hole in frozen soil, but the effort is too great. People didn't just die in summer months, and people can't wait for the months when the soils are soft enough to dig and deposit their dead. Historically speaking, winter is the time when people died the most. In finno-ugric societies, people would also deposit their dead in these storehouses because, as they are designed to keep predators away from food, they also keep the corpses away from predators, especially during winter, when you cannot possibly dig holes in the frozen ground to bury the dead. These houses became the resting places of the dead, so that their corpses can be protected, giving rise to actual burial huts on chicken legs. Well, Baba Yaga is dead, so she is in one of these. Of course, this may also mean that she, as the first ancestor, the ancestral spirit, she may indeed be connected to a certain extent, of course, to the preservation of stored foods, connecting the two functions of these storehouses as a means to preserve stored foods and the departed, the preservation of corpses. Now, if there's any healing aspect to Baba Yaga, this would be it, as it isn't also uncommon to place the sick in these storehouses so they may heal away from the community to avoid the spreading of disease, and at the same time they are not disturbed by predators. Baba Yaga as the ancestral spirit may be connected to this aspect of the sick and dying and of the dead as well. Now, one curious thing about these burial huts is that you obviously place them outside the community. The place of the dead is not inside the dwelling spaces of the living, for a variety of reasons, from the possible spread of disease to the fear of death and of the dead. Burial spaces are often, obviously, away from the community of the living, much more so when you are dealing with prominent figures of the community, or in some way figures of the human society whose actions have marked on deep levels, including traumatic ones, and such dead persons are buried in spaces which either become sacred or cursed. And among many animistic communities and cultures and ethnic groups, it is taboo certain actions in burial grounds, particularly the actions that are not in the specific days appropriate for a certain ceremony or ritual within the grounds of the dead, especially before the right propitiations of the spirits of the departed. This also includes taboos revolving around shaman figures, spiritually powerful figures whose burial grounds are sacred, and such ancestral spirits must not be disturbed. And I don't think it is a coincidence, many of these burial huts having been placed on forested lands and on marshes, on liminal spaces out there in the wilderness, for the reasons here expressed. And at the same time, those are exactly the places in the landscape where you are expected to find Baba Yaga's hut on chicken legs. This is another evidence that Baba Yaga is a dead ancestor. I mean, not only this, but in many folktales, Baba Yaga is the bone-legged one, referring to either she being a walking, rotting corpse, or she is a skeleton or part skeleton. She's dead, after all. So, I believe this is important to state, everything said here so far, because in this way, we avoid mixing Baba Yaga with modern conceptions and romantic imagery and ideas of the Virgin Mother and Crone type of thing, and the figure of the witch in New Age romantic movements and the religious expressions as well and such. She's not a goddess, she's an ancestral spirit, and there's a big difference between the two, particularly in the way we choose to express some sort of religious or spiritual action towards Baba Yaga and what she represents or may represent, particularly in an animistic approach and view. She is connected to the dead and to death as an ancestral spirit, or the spirit of the first ancestor or the first dead, knowledgeable in such matters, which can be of aid but also dangerous. And people need to understand the dangers, but also benefits behind either ancestral worship or contact with the deceased. I mean, laughter is not even allowed in her house. This is another sign of taboo and respect towards the deceased in their own burial sites. So we are stepping here into the realm of the dead, the departed, and ancestors and the dead are not the same thing, and this is where an understanding of this separation is crucial to understand if we are indeed going to actively express ourselves in a spiritual way towards Baba Yaga or towards what she represents. So tell me what you think about this in the comments, please. I'm certain your insights will help me and the community here to dig further into Baba Yaga and come to a better understanding of who she is and what she represents. The figure of Baba Yaga is quite interesting to me. It's the ambivalence of her character, and there's no particular concrete morality to her nature, but I wouldn't say she's amoral. There's clearly multi-layered aspects to Baba Yaga, which are the product of the evolution of folklore through time. Of course, we will see in Baba Yaga quite a lot of contradictory facets to this figure, as she seems to be quite the ancient conception towards the dead and the concept of the ancestor within an animistic perspective. She's not whole evil, but she's not utterly good either. It is the role played by the dead and the ancestors in animistic cosmologies and belief systems. An ancient spirit that can be of aid, but it is terrifying at the same time. It's not even a question of duality, but a versatile, even paradoxical character applied to the spirits of the dead and the spirits of those who become ancestors, which can be quite unpredictable in their actions. An ancestor can be of help, and that is often the position assumed by the ancestor, the main role, if you will, to continue to provide some beneficial action towards the community of the living. But in the grand scheme of things, and when meddling with powers that stand on the threshold betwixt and between, any action has its consequences, as these are powers beyond the living that can have great effect upon both sides, as one change in the course of life can alter the nature of death and vice versa. I think we are dealing with quite the paradox revolving around taboo towards death and the dead as well. There are certain restrictions towards the dead and the ancestors and visitation of their places and of burial, and even within the rituals and the yearly moments to invoke them, but sometimes there's no other choice, and there's this necessity to have their power and knowledge aiding the course of life of the human community. We see in Baba Yaga the fear and reverence of death, a hostile power there's no escape from, and there's fear of the inevitability of death, but at the same time, an ancestor can aid or can even guide the community of the living. It's this multi-layered aspect to Baba Yaga that makes me disagree with the simplistic idea that she is the crone or a goddess, or even the romantic view on the midwife. There's even this conflicting aspect to Baba Yaga, as she is actually very welcoming, even if she is up to no good to those who visit her or somehow are entangled in this mystical environment. This familiar and welcoming aspect to the ancestors, but the dangerous side of dealing too much with death and with the realm of the dead. And there also seems to be this initiatory aspect to it, as we see the character of Vasilisa Prekashne, as she has to earn the fire, she has to earn the welcome at Baba Yaga's hut, and she must perform a series of tasks, right? There's also some aspects of Baba Yaga related to divinatory arts as well, which I can delve into it in some other future video, but there's clearly this augury related to the dead and or to the ancestors. I mean, necromancy in its original sense, was augury through the spirits of the departed or the dead, which can be manifested in many different forms, even the flight of birds. But there's this prophetic theme around Baba Yaga as the spirit of the ancestor, which provides insight into the past and into the future. Vasilisa is in a position where she is both in danger, but if she plays out according to Baba Yaga's instructions, there's a lot of useful stuff Vasilisa can gain from Baba Yaga, which ultimately makes her life better, a better life, a better one. And mind you that if indeed we are in the presence of the first ancestor, this is the most knowledgeable spirit closest to humans and knows how it's like to be a human. There isn't this distance that is usually seen between deities and humans, or between humans and other spirits. This is an ancestor, a once living human person. This is an ancestor spirit who is familiar with the existential condition of humans, and as an ancestral spirit, it is tied to the human community, but holds powerful knowledge in the realms of the dead and or other worldly existences. So she is the best guide and best spirit to turn to for advice in such matters, and will be more willing to help the community of the living because of these ancestral ties. And she does aid Vasilisa quite a lot, but not without consequences, or rather, not without the idea that there might be harmful consequences to this help, as such is the nature of the dead, and such is the nature of initiatory figures in some form of magical arts. There are consequences to everything we want to learn about, and perhaps more so when dealing with unknown and otherworldly powers the living tend to seek out beyond the mundane. You have to work your way through in order to grow, right? To grow up and become strong and powerful to face the inevitable hardships of the world. That there isn't this soft ambience with Baba Yaga, that there isn't this wholly comfortable environment with Baba Yaga. There's quite a lot that can be learned, and it is useful. There's some comfort and a welcoming stay, but to a certain extent, as there's always in the air this sense of dread, almost, that there might be something harmful that can happen. So you won't exaggerate or extend your stay more than you should, so you won't get lazy, and always attentive, always sharp of mind, and always working hard to survive. Both the harmful and beneficial aspects of the wisdom lent by the ancestors. The darker and most unpleasant aspects of death that can be used for something beneficial if one has the wisdom to apply them in the most difficult situations. Anyway, I have overextended this discussion. Let's leave it here, right? I do hope to read your comments on this and your own ideas on the matter. So, well, thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video, and as always, thank you for today. Until we meet again, my dear friends.